The idyllic shores of East Hampton, New York have long been synonymous with luxury, exclusivity, and a serene escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. This picturesque setting, with its pristine beaches and opulent homes, paints a picture of tranquility and affluence. Yet beneath this veneer of affluence lies a stark reality, a system that often preys on the most vulnerable members of society. The domestic workers who maintain these luxurious homes frequently face exploitation and abuse. In a move touted as a progressive step towards protecting undocumented immigrants, East Hampton officials recently announced that local law enforcement would no longer detain individuals solely on the basis of their immigration status. This policy shift aims to foster a sense of security within the immigrant community. While this decision has been met with praise from some quarters, it has also raised concerns about the potential for increased exploitation of undocumented workers, particularly those employed in domestic service roles. The fear is that without the threat of deportation, these workers might be more easily taken advantage of. This essay delves into the complex issue of migrant worker exploitation in East Hampton, examining the historical context, the roots of this exploitation, and how it has evolved over time. The modern-day parallels with visa slavery, where workers are bound to their employers under restrictive visa conditions, and the potential consequences of this new policy. The implications of such a policy change are far-reaching and complex. The decision by East Hampton officials has ignited a heated debate about the balance between protecting undocumented immigrants and preventing their exploitation. Community members are divided on the issue. Proponents of the policy argue that it creates a safe haven for undocumented workers, allowing them to live and work without the constant fear of deportation. They believe this will lead to a more just and humane society. They contend that this sense of security will empower workers to report abuse and exploitation without jeopardizing their immigration status. This could lead to better working conditions and fairer treatment. However, critics argue that this policy is naive at best and dangerously short-sighted at worst. They worry about the unintended consequences. They fear that it will embolden unscrupulous employers, creating a climate where undocumented workers are even more vulnerable to exploitation. The lack of enforcement could lead to a rise in abuse cases. Without the threat of immigration enforcement, these employers may feel free to engage in wage theft, unsafe working conditions, and even forced labor, knowing that their victims are unlikely to come forward. This could perpetuate a cycle of abuse. The situation in East Hampton serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing struggle for immigrant rights and the need for comprehensive immigration reform. It underscores the importance of addressing these issues at a national level. It highlights the difficult choices faced by local governments as they grapple with the complexities of immigration enforcement in the absence of a coherent national policy. These decisions have profound impacts on the lives of many. As we navigate this complex terrain, it is imperative that we prioritize the safety and well-being of all workers, regardless of their immigration status. Only then can we hope to create a fair and just society for everyone. To understand the potential ramifications of East Hampton's new policy, it's crucial to examine the historical context of domestic work, particularly its deep and troubling ties to slavery and exploitation. This history is not just a backdrop but a foundation that has shaped the experiences of domestic workers for generations. For centuries, domestic labor, often involving tasks like cooking, cleaning, and childcare, was performed by individuals with little to no power, often women of color, who were denied basic rights and freedoms. These women were the backbone of many households, yet their contributions were largely unrecognized and undervalued. In the United States, the institution of slavery relied heavily on the unpaid labor of black women, who were forced to perform domestic tasks for their enslavers. These women endured unimaginable hardships and were subjected to severe mistreatment. After the abolition of slavery, black women continued to be relegated to low-paying, physically demanding domestic work, often facing discrimination and abuse at the hands of their employers. Despite the end of slavery, the legacy of exploitation persisted. This legacy of exploitation continued throughout the 20th century, as women from immigrant communities, often from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia, filled the demand for domestic workers. These women brought their own stories of struggle and resilience. Many of these women arrived in the United States through precarious legal channels or without documentation, making them particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Their undocumented status often left them with little recourse against abusive employers. The historical context reminds us that domestic work has long been associated with power imbalances and exploitation. These power dynamics have consistently placed domestic workers in vulnerable positions. The lack of legal protections and the often isolated nature of domestic work create a breeding ground for abuse, particularly when workers are afraid to speak out for fear of losing their jobs or being deported. This systemic issue continues to affect countless lives today. The exploitation faced by many migrant domestic workers today bears a chilling resemblance to a modern form of slavery, visa slavery, where individuals are trapped in a cycle of abuse and exploitation. This insidious system traps workers in exploitative situations by leveraging their immigration status as a tool of coercion, making it nearly impossible for them to escape. Employers often threaten to report workers to immigration authorities if they complain about working conditions, demand fair wages, or attempt to leave their jobs, creating a climate of fear and submission. A harrowing case from Wisconsin in 2023 starkly illustrates the horrors of visa slavery, shedding light on the dark reality faced by many. A Filipino woman endured nearly 2 decades of forced labor and abuse at the hands of a couple who had brought her to the United States on a work visa, exploiting her vulnerability. This case, which made national headlines, exposed the vulnerability of migrant workers who are often isolated, afraid to speak out, and unaware of their rights, making them easy targets for exploitation. The Wisconsin case is not an isolated incident but rather a reflection of a widespread issue affecting countless individuals. Countless other migrant workers, many employed in domestic service roles, find themselves trapped in similar situations across the United States, living in constant fear. The fear of deportation, coupled with language barriers, cultural differences, and limited access to legal resources, prevents many victims from coming forward, leaving them in a perpetual state of vulnerability. The parallels between visa slavery and the potential consequences of East Hampton's new policy are deeply concerning, as they highlight the systemic issues at play. By removing the threat of immigration enforcement for employers, the policy inadvertently creates an environment where unscrupulous individuals may feel emboldened to exploit undocumented workers, knowing they are unlikely to face legal repercussions, thus perpetuating the cycle of abuse. In the shadows of affluence, fear and exploitation often thrive. It's a stark contrast to the gleaming facades and luxurious lifestyles that dominate the public eye. Beneath the surface, there are stories of struggle, of individuals navigating a world that often seems indifferent to their plight. These stories, though hidden, are a crucial part of the narrative. They remind us that prosperity isn't always shared equally, and that behind every success, there may be untold sacrifices. In this segment, we explore the critical strategies and policies designed to safeguard those most at risk in the workforce. It's about creating a safety net that ensures fair treatment and respect for every worker, regardless of their role or status. Now we turn our attention to the stories of those who have been exploited in the workplace. By giving them a platform, we hope to shine a light on their struggles and advocate for meaningful change. Their voices are essential in shaping a more just and equitable work environment. The exploitation of workers isn't just a localized issue. It has escalated into a national crisis that demands immediate action. We must recognize the urgency of the situation and mobilize resources to address the systemic problems that perpetuate this injustice. Finally, we emphasize the importance of upholding the dignity and rights of all workers. Every individual deserves to work in conditions that respect their humanity and provide fair compensation for their labor. It's a fundamental principle that should guide our actions and policies moving forward.